sometime I will bring a ping pong ball and a paddle, and I will go, the ball's in your court. But in absence of props, we can say the same thing. So now to shift gears, and Carolyn has the microphone so that people who are, oh, Diane, there we go.
Bill, I'd like to know a little bit about what you're going to talk about on Saturday.
What I'm going to talk about on Saturday. Okay. About half of it will be driven by the experiences and questions that people are having in engaging in the practices. So that's a big piece of this. It's not just a one-way information dump. This is actually designed to be interactive. And as with most times when I sit down in front of a group of people, I find out something. Something comes to me about what's needed. And since I'm a bit dense, I can't do it all intuitively. People actually have to say what's on their minds. And so that's part of it. But this, the way that the program is set up, you have an opportunity to go through some of the practices in a structured way, the calm abiding practices, as well as the Chenrezig practice and the foundational practices. And so the foundational practices in particular are divided up into quarters of the year, just to make it easier to focus on them. And so this first quarter of the year is on the refuge and bodhicitta, with the prostrations on that practice. So we'll be going into that more, I provided a bit of an overview the last time. And for anybody who's interested, that's on the YouTube archive, and you can look at that. But it'll be mainly focused on the refuge part and whatever anybody brings up.
Bill, I have a question about my practice. And I understand, or I've heard, that I'm the best judge of what I'm doing and that. But as part of the not bringing hope and fear and expectations and other things, I'm wondering if others as well as myself could hear you or Dora explain a little more about how to stop and kind of do a reality check or a looking at, like, well, where is my practice now? But instead of those questions coming from me, it would, because I can doubt myself, I'm wondering about, it would also help to hear pointers from you.
Pointers about which part exactly?
Well, I've been doing this for maybe 4 or 5 years, maybe, and I have a sense of where I am in the progression of, like, well, how stable is my shamatha, or how is it when I take the practice off the cushion on the road, and when is a distraction not a distraction? So I hear various tips and teachings, but sometime I would like to just check in. Where am I in my practice? And I guess so I'm asking for maybe it's hearing certain tips or questions again, or certain pointers about ways to look at where I might be. For instance, hearing one that is, if I'm not acting kinder, well, then my practice isn't working very well. You know, those kind of, and I'm wondering if that's a use to other people as well as me.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's talked about is how it is helpful to check in on ourselves and reflect, and kind of not to do it too often, like, man, this was a bad session, I'm a bad, I'm a disaster, I give up. But looking at, the last year and saying, what happened? How'd it go this year? And can I see anything, different about myself that could be related to my practice? I think your questions are good. How is my shamatha? Is it a little more stable or not? And if not, am I practicing a lot less than I was, or am I, what's going on there? And certainly checking in on compassion, and I think they would say, like, self-clinging. So kind of levels of, maybe renunciation could be a word too, looking to see, am I holding more tightly or less tightly to the things of the world, the way things are going, my ups and downs? Am I getting swung harder or softer? Am I doing a little bit less lurching this way and that way? Reactivity in general, do I flare up in anger less often than I did, or more often, or how's that going? Just looking at the kind of the klesha kind of reactivity. But at the same time, other things are happening besides our practice. So, maybe we put ourselves in an environment where it's harder this year, or avoided a lot of things where I never work with people in committees anymore, and boy, my practice is really great because I don't have conflict with people. But maybe that's not the best test. Maybe it'd be good to try that out. So it's kind of a reflection of how we're doing, but also what we've been doing. But I think it's also really good to connect with, reconnect, like, why do I practice really? Why do I practice? Not just theoretically why we should be, for the benefit of all sentient beings, maybe, but what kind of drives me, and is that kind of happening for me? And if not, then, and thinking, even just like Bill was having us reflect this morning, what has helped us, what have we really connected to in the past? And if that's something that still kind of inspires us and fires us up, then are we making that effort to follow up on that? Or did we think, I should be doing this other thing, so I'm doing that, but we aren't really following that core impetus that's inside us? And I think that's really good to just touch in on there and say, if I die next year, what should I be doing now to feel good when I'm checking out?
I think it's part of my hesitation, I can put my finger on it now, in answering, is that I find it's easy to kind of shift into an overall kind of measure without when our practice actually happens in the details. And what our practice is, sort of in a certain way, should inform us as to kind of what kind of investigation should we be engaged in to find where the additional opportunities to go deeper, and where we're actually creating obstacles for ourselves, where we let go, where we've not kept fresh in our mind the inspiration. So we could use any framework in practice as a lens for looking. If we're working a lot with things that involve the four emotionals, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, then part of the framework for looking is, how am I actually engaged in those practices? And has a kind of this kind of veil come down, where I'm sort of vaguely engaged in them now, but not really. There's a lack of clarity in it, and so whatever the lens is, and that will depend a lot on exactly what we're engaged in and how we're engaged in it. So I think it's actually a very personal question. And the generic answers always will have to lead back down to something quite particular. So if you can just say, I'm not particularly feeling very kind, but there's no track back into your practice, then it's kind of frustrating. It's just, you just kind of. And it may not even be a relatively informed thought in connection with your practice. It's just like, well, it's just another thing that comes up in my mind. I just happen to be judging myself well or poorly today. So, oh, I'm not very kind. But we have to be able to look into what we're doing. That piece of, I was talking about, what's most profound is the thing that actually opens us to some kind of transformation. So being able to put our finger on our practice and look to see what that is that's a critical part of this. So then, the four thoughts that turn the mind, the reflections on precious human existence, impermanence and death, karma, how we're working with causes and conditions and what we create in our life, how we're either increasingly or decreasingly fooled by the shiny bubbles of our samsaric existence. Those kinds of things, those reflections are actually very helpful for teasing out things where there are opportunities or obstacles.
Actually, both of your directions of answering are helpful. One question I have is, when I hear you use the word profound, it can be defined in a few ways, but it seems here, do you mean what's the most intense or active feeling or
Well, I was trying to define it in terms of the most profound thing that you can do is that which actually allows for some kind of transformation. So that's an in the moment. It's an in the moment, and it's circumstantial depending on what you're actually up to.
Yes, and that's how you used it. But it seems that, because I've heard that word come up other times, and so there's this vestige of my memory going, sometimes profound is...
that's why I was delivering a definition along with and just pointing out, actually, you can say profound, which then is something way over there.
Okay.
It's either long ago and far away or way in the future and far away.
Yeah.
But profound is actually in what is most profound. The potential is always in the moment. It's always in what we can do at the moment. And that's the door.
All right. In my, I'll try and ask it differently.
Then I'll try and answer it differently.
Okay.
No guarantees on either side, but
Exactly.
we'll remain friends.
Exactly. But sometimes the sense in me is that I can't work with what's so neutral that I barely see it, but I can wake up and look at something that has more energy or grip about it, and that's recognizing the door.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you for both your directions of answering.
Yeah. Finding that spot where there's some kind of energy or possibility, and you can actually put your attention on something. You can bring all the things that have come together by causes and conditions in your life, in your training, and the Dharma that comes together. There's something. There's some, and it does have some. You're right. It does have some energy. There'll be a place with some kind of energy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. Since no one else was asking a whole lot of questions, I figured I'd ask this one. And it's not as well formed as I'd like, but I'll try. I recently realized that a loan, money, that I thought after 10 years would be forgiven me, okay? So I wouldn't have to pay it back after that 10-year mark, 120 payments. Recently realized that it's very likely that they're going to require me, or try to require me, to pay another 8 years on it. And I'm pretty darn sure I did everything I was supposed to, checked all the boxes, did everything I was supposed to in order to get that forgiveness after 120 payments. And so now I'm feeling, the only way I can say it without cursing is cheated. I feel very cheated.
To what?
Cheated because they're
cheated.
not
Yeah.
they're not going to forgive I suspect I will not be able to get this loan forgiven. And the way it for me has brought up a great deal of resentment and feeling of not being free, tied to something, no way out. I've attempted to, some partially effective ways of looking at this for me have been, well, now I feel like every other person of color, an extremely poor white person in the United States, expecting things to be reasonable and fair, and they're not. So I guess I'm in good company, right? That helped for about half a day. I'm also thinking, well, I guess this is another opportunity for me to continue to practice kindness and compassion despite having this feeling. And the other thing is that I thought of, again, these are things that I just recently thought of, so I haven't even had a chance to really put them in practice yet, is, well, I'm never free as a human being in samsara, so there's a perspective there. What I'm asking for is, how would you advise me and anybody else who's facing similar situations to contemplate this, to practice, to help deal with that? Part of me does want to sue and all these things, and I'm wondering if that's really all that healthy, but or not sue, but take them to court, yada yada. Mm-hmm. There's that angry, social justice part of me, and the slightly more realistic part of me that thinks, yeah, it might work, might not. Anyway, your perspective on ways of looking at this, practices I can do. Thank you.
Well, there are two sides to it, and you actually, I think left to your own devices, you would do just fine, because you've touched on both how the issues involved in making practical decisions, which is that there might be some potential for doing something, but the cost might be, the cost of doing something might be way more than you could bear in the long run, and the likelihood of having it turn out in a way that was satisfying in the long run, you have to weigh all those, and so you put your finger on that part of it. And the other thing that you put your finger on is that in this life we are not free. And so if we're going to find the degrees of freedom that are available to us and open them up, then that's the transformative piece in this, is finding those places. And some of it just the contemplation that you engaged in, like, well, are any of us actually free? And we can expand it to the animal realm too. It's like, how many degrees of freedom do all kinds of sentient beings have? And it's rather limited, and that's one of the contemplations of the four thoughts. Contemplation: how is this samsara mechanism actually operating, and where are my degrees of freedom within that? And it might be that the more we can find that part of it, it might be that we actually can be more skillful and more resilient in taking on whatever practical steps that we might take on. We could become more skillful because we might find some level of some sense where actually I'm not betting all my psychic chips on winning this and them losing, particularly them losing. If we give up on that a little bit, if we have someplace else to turn to in our own stream of being, where we actually feel my well-being at the deepest level is not dependent upon them losing, we can approach the practical side with more resilience. And it may be that actually our circumstance, I have no idea, but I'll just throw out the possibility that our circumstance, we could find ourselves in a circumstance where actually, in kind of ordinary terms, I'm a poster child for a class action suit, but do I really want to take it on? Okay. And that's not an easy question, but I would propose that the more that we can find the inner resilience, the more we can engage with that question in a skillful way, in a way that would be more helpful for ourselves and also for others as well.
I think that's a I'm thinking of my 10 examples that are like that, and it's an amazing experience to have because I think in general we're so used to having a lot of freedom and choice and sense of control. So when suddenly you have a situation where they are holding 99 of 100 cards. I have maybe I have a card, I'm not sure what it is, but suddenly the control is totally somewhere else, and that is a special experience. And what I notice, and a lot of times it takes, to engage with it, to try to change it. Often, things I'm thinking of, I'm just thinking of how many phone calls it took me to go through all, and all the hoops to get to the person, and then it's a different person every time, explaining the thing every time, and to correct, one of these kind of things, and how that felt. But what I would notice is I could pick up that feeling and I could let it go. I could be in it more, or I could be in it less. So it was very, it's helpful to see, can we, it's the thing with being angry in general is, who does that hurt? And it's, it's not AT&T, or whatever. It's, I am polluting my mind stream, and so I just think it's very interesting to just sort of, watch that and work with that and choose to not have your mind hijacked, which doesn't necessarily mean to blow it off and say, okay, whatever they want to do. It might mean making 20 phone calls. And I also think it was very interesting to, how do I talk with the person? And, they didn't make up the thing or whatever, usually you're not talking to whoever the perpetrator is, and yet, there's certain things that seem to get more action than others. And man, that is interesting, because I want to treat the person well. And like they're really a person who deserves to be treated. But at the same time, it's like there's something about this, Anyway, so with these occasions, I've had a chance. I've tried 10 different things because I had to make 10 different phone calls and talk to 10 different people. This time I was this way, and this time I was that way. And so it's, I think, using this as a learning and remembering that what we, like Bill says, what we do have some choice over our own minds, and that's what we want to protect and make it the way we want it to be as much as we can, and then do whatever the best course of action seems to be. Try to do it without getting lost in being at the end of the whip of somebody else's whip.
On a personal note, I'd say it's very helpful if you can watch somebody actually do this more successfully than you could do it. It is actually helpful. It's like, no, it's actually possible. Peter.
The first precept says, I won't kill or let anybody else kill that I can. And that aspects of that precept are difficult for me because at a rational level, everything on the planet kills in order to live. If one says, I will be a vegetarian, killing still happens. The monks who are really concerned about this recognize and worry about the fact that when they inhale, they're killing things. And certainly, I've no trouble thinking that I'm not going to go around shooting people, but
It's a start.
merit of the practicality and livability of the precept seems difficult for me, and your comments about the first precept would be appreciated.
Well, I have, I think you listed pretty much all my concerns too. And I think particularly in the modern world where we have much more extensive understanding of biology and life cycles of things, and can know more about those cycles, it's even more challenging. And given that it is, as you say, it's actually impossible to live a life without causing, even if we don't say death, without causing harm. We don't even need to raise the bar all the way to death. So I think it's a very challenging thing, but I think one of the things that I've found helpful is to set aside sort of the absolute sense of it, having rationally concluded that I'm not going to, and I can't imagine anyone being able to move without leaving an imprint on some dust mites that might or might not survive. Whatever it is, it's not possible. So then how do we actually do something that's in accord with what's being asked? The direction, the ideal, you could say. the ideal. And that's a challenging question, and I think it should remain a challenging question. That's actually part of, I think, the precept, is to actually keep in mind an intention, keep in mind a direction, keep in mind a cultivation, as opposed to merely having figured out how we can switch around our life so that we never, okay, now I'm on the good side, because I no longer do that. And that's one of the things you pointed out, even for vegetarians, the soil gets tilled, the aphids get knocked off the broccoli. Even if you don't squish them, you just took away their lunch, and they won't do well after that. So that notion that we will do something and then we'll be okay, or we go let the belt out a notch and just go, yes, I've got it. That doesn't capture that essence of the continual mindfulness and engagement that's actually being called upon, that we're called on to engage with. So I don't think there isn't an absolute practical answer, and I think in that one of the biggest challenges for me is to maintain some kind of momentum, to stay engaged with it, as opposed to just declaring it hopeless, and then it's like, no, this is not possible, nothing to do. So finding that edge, I think, that's the thing.
Since it's hopeless, I'll kill this darn fly anyway.
Yeah, and then in everything else too. Why stop there? Yeah. So clearly, there are the challenges. They just go on and on. But staying engaged is kind of the critical piece of it. Simply, the notion of honesty or theft. What actually is taking what is not given? That one, if you start to look closely, it's not like, I haven't robbed any banks lately or shoplifted. I'm fine. That's not the intention isn't to make us feel fine and call it good and go home. The intention is to keep us engaged. Yeah. Anything to add?
I think that's good. I was also thinking one thing in our culture is that we have a lot of killing done for us. So, there's exterminators going around and making sure we don't have too many certain kind of pests in our environment. So even appreciating that fact, I mean, if you go some places and you realize, oh my gosh, there's animals everywhere in my hotel room and whatever. And so you realize that at home we have a lot of things that are done and we don't even have to see it. So that consciousness, I think that is really a good point. And yeah, I think it's pretty challenging, and I think people face it more too. I mean, when you go out to SCOL and you say, oh my gosh, there's animals that are doing harm to our buildings and that kind of thing, and then it becomes, I think we have it a little bit easier in the city where we don't have to face quite as many things. So it is a journey. I have my, I will give up a house plant if the pests want it, when I can't sort of just hose them off or something. But I have 40-year bonsai trees. I mean, I've had them for 40 years, and I kill scale. So I'm not proud of it, and I notice it when I do it, but I do it.
While you're going there, one thing that an overall perspective is from kind of a Mahayana point of view, or the Bodhisattva point of view, that sense of continually engaging with all the ways that suffering arises, just staying engaged with that. And I think it's also helpful to think about the depth of suffering in samsara, the inescapability of it, and the inescapability of our being stuck in the middle of that, and that we can't just hop to the side and be the clean one. It's that actually is that's a potent contemplation.
So on that note, when Boka Rinpoche was here in '96, I asked him a question about killing things, because being a gardener, I knew I was killing things all the time, quite deliberately. And his answer to me was so helpful in that he said, just when I do that, wish that in another life we have a more fruitful or productive relationship. And so I figure if I ever become a benefit to all beings, my followers will be the slugs, the rats, the ants. They're my sangha. And then the other thing,
They
one day
they
I
might
went,
be your teachers.
Yes, well, they are right now, that's for sure. And I went to squish something, and I realized that just before I did it, I thought, oh, here's my big thumb, which is bigger than this creature, about to squish it. And somebody with a bigger thumb than me could think about me in that same way, like, oh, here's this pesky little thing. I'll just get rid of it. And so it made me stop and think about what I was doing before I did it. And I actually didn't that time, but not to say I haven't still on other occasions. So I think this idea of like just looking at it is so helpful. So thank you for your answers.
Yeah. It can be the source of ever-deepening opening of the heart, which I think is important along the way. By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahabuddha and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you all. And a reminder that Willow will now be